called disciple. We're really good at promoting being Christian, aren't we? In fact, we live in a Christian country. Anybody ever heard that? We live in a Christian nation. If you live in the South, I guarantee you almost everyone you talk to will be a Christian. That's where we are, right? What I want to do this morning is I want to talk about being more than a Christian. I want to talk about being a disciple. We understand, what does a person have to do to be a Christian? Simply put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ, what he did for them on the cross. It's that simple. However, to be a disciple is not a one and done thing. To be a disciple is a lifelong journey. And so this morning, I want to say, hey, look, if you've never given your life to Jesus Christ, today's a good time for it. But I want to talk about something that goes deeper, farther. Something that is going to challenge you your whole life. And that is, what does it mean to be a disciple? In 2020, there was this certain thing that, I don't know, it's kind of almost like this haze in our background. Anybody remember 2020? When everything went into a lockdown, there was something I missed immensely. One of the great joys of my life that I've started, and by the way, I only started doing this somewhere around about 2014, 2015 when I actually started to drink coffee. But one of the things that I began to do is I like to go to different coffee shops around, and I like to try different coffee shops' coffee. Do you make good coffee? And by the way, it's amazing how many coffee shops don't make good coffee. You got one job and you don't do it. Okay, that's another point. All that to say is when 2020 hit and everybody was trying to figure out how to deal with this thing called COVID, certain shops closed down for a while. It wasn't, you couldn't go to coffee shops and sit there and... So my wife stopped and said, hey, why don't we get an espresso machine and why don't we learn to make coffee at home? Now, I thought that was a brilliant idea. And so we went out, we bought a little espresso machine and we put it on our counter and we started to try to make coffee at home. One of the things that I realized is there's a reason why a lot of coffee shops don't make good coffee. Is because making good coffee is a little more than simply sticking coffee grounds in a machine and letting water pour over it. You kind of end up with something unique and may have some caffeine in it, but it doesn't taste very good. And for a while there, it was a struggle. And by the way, I was watching YouTube one day and I came across a guy by the name of James Hoffmann. James Hoffmann is a 2007 barista champion. He's from England. He's also founder of the Square Mile Roastery. So if anyone's into coffee, he's a big deal. But I found a YouTube channel that he started talking about how to make coffee. Coffee of all sorts, pour-overs, espresso, lattes. Coffee machine. I want to say very quickly, I became a disciple of James Hoffmann. By following somebody who knew how to make coffee, after a not too long a time following instructions and directions, guess what I was soon able to do? I could make a coffee about as good as most of the ones I was having in the cafes around. Now, I'm not talking to you this morning about James Hoffmann and coffee because I think you need to go out and watch James Hoffmann and learn how to make good coffee. And that's not the goal. I'm simply trying to say this. All of us, in some area of our life, we are following somebody. There is somebody in your life right now that you are following for directions in order to improve something. It may be your health. There may be a doctor that you're saying, I'm having to follow his directions. I'm having to, hey, whatever you say, I'm going to go there because I believe you have the answers. It may be in the maintenance of your car. It may be in how to do the plumbing in your house. We all choose to follow somebody in order to learn how to be better at something. Now, there is something that is much deeper than trying to learn how to fix a fan belt on your car, learning how to change the drain traps in your sink. There is something that actually hums beneath the surface that actually guides our lives. There is something so much deeper than, hey, I need advice on how to make a great beef bourguignon. Instead, there's this something that sits under the background of our life that we try to answer the questions that rise that are much deeper than that. There are questions that kind of arise about God. There's questions that rise about what's right and wrong. There's questions that arise about morality, about our ethics. There's something that we're looking forward to give us direction, hope, and meaning to why we live. And can I say, as good as a good cup of coffee is, no cup of coffee can give us that meaning. Whether we realize it or not, we are all we're all covering up, or we're all trying to answer that hum that sits in the back of our life. Whether you are a follower of Jesus or not, we're all trying to answer that question. What's right? What's wrong? What's the purpose of life? Who has the right to say this has meaning and this doesn't? And the reality is that for most people, we pick up our values, we pick up our ethics, we pick up our spirituality, almost like we pick up seashells off of the beach. For most people, there's this idea that we walk along, and as we're trying to answer the questions, whatever the question we're trying to answer, we pick up a seashell almost like, yeah, that's a pretty looking one. I like the look of that one. And we shove it in our pocket, and we kind of add it to our collection. But can I say this? The values that shape our lives, the values that give us meaning, the things that give us hope should be more important than simply a casual picking up something off the seashore. You see, isn't it true most of the values, the things that you consider right or wrong, most of the things that you consider to have meaning, most of us picked it up from our mom, our dad? When we were young, they said, don't do that. If you do that, we'll smack your hand. And we learned, don't do that. When we got older, we began to maybe, depending upon where you're at, if you had parents who took you to Sunday school, you began to maybe got the 10 Commandments that said, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill. You shall honor the Sabbath day. Don't talk back to your mom and dad. And we got some values in there. As you got to college, things kind of went a little bit more haywire, depending upon what kind of college you went to, whether you went to a Christian college or whether you went to a secular college. It might have been simply you went to a secular college and they began to say, yeah, that stuff is somebody who's just trying to control your life. You need to make your own decisions. You need to choose for yourself what's right and wrong. And we began to get all of these ideas, and we began to say, well, what's right, what's wrong? Well, I kind of made up my mind, this is right and this is wrong, and we begin to shove it into our pocket. But being a follower, and here's the thing to understand, your life is following after somebody already. You're choosing to follow somebody. Your life is going in a direction, and there's something or someone who is giving you purpose, telling you this is the way it is supposed to be. And I think it's a little more important than simply shoving oddball values that we kind of like into our pocket. Today, I'm going to talk about this idea that for those of us who choose to follow Jesus Christ, and let me just put it a different way, for those of us who call ourselves a Christian, being a follower is much more than simply saying, I prayed a prayer and asked Jesus into my heart. Being a disciple is someone who is so much more than simply said, well, I put a tag on my name that says now I am James Carter the Christian. We're going to start this morning where all disciples should start. And that is at finding someone worth following. Okay, now we say we're a Christian, so therefore we are assuming what? We have someone that we say we are following. By the way, let's start at this moment. There is this time when Jesus came, and most of the Jews did not get the understanding of the whole Bethlehem. Most of them didn't even know it happened. We read about it, and we have it in our Bible today so that we know the Bethlehem experience. But most of the Jews who came across Jesus did not go talking to the shepherds or to the wise men. They never knew Mary and Joseph. But one day they heard this man that came along, and he stood on the Mount of Olives, and he began to give a message. He began to give a way of living that was so radical. We know the Sermon on the Mount. In one of Jesus' first sermon, he begins to say, here is what a disciple or a follower of Jesus looks like. Now, let's read it real quick. If you got your Bibles, Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 10. And Jesus in his first, by the way, this probably wasn't his first sermon, but it's the first sermon we have recorded for us, begins to say this. God blesses those who are poor and realizes their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. When Jesus came on the scene and most of the Jewish people heard him, they did not know a baby born in a manger to a virgin named Mary. They heard a radical way of living that totally threw their understanding of what it meant to be blessed by God. You see, just as today, they believed that if you were blessed by God, you would be rich, happy, proud. Things are going your way. You see, here's the reality. We're no different today, are we? You walk into the store and you say to someone, how are you doing today? And they say, I'm blessed. Everything's going well. I'm blessed. All my grandkids are around. I've got a good job. I've got money in the bank. My boat is floating. My Harley's in the garage looking good. So I am blessed. Here's what Jesus said. He went to a totally different direction. And he said, those who are blessed are those who are poor. Those who are blessed are those who are hurting and mourn. Those who are blessed are those who are humble. Those who are blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice or for righteousness. Those who are blessed are those who show mercy on others. Those who are blessed are those whose hearts are pure. Those who are blessed are those who seek peace. Those who are blessed in my kingdom are those who get persecuted for doing what is right. You see, we still live in a society today where we want Christians who are winners, don't we? We want to be part of groups, and we join large political organizations that put so much pressure on people, and we're going, hey, we're going to make sure that they hear us and they feel us, and if they don't do our thing. And Jesus was saying, well, that's fine, and yeah, do your political duty, but here's those who are blessed in my kingdom. Those who mourn, those who are hungry for righteousness, those who are humble, those who seek peace, those who are persecuted. It is a radical way of living that Jesus calls us to. Being a disciple is not one that always puts on the winning side. It's on the winning side, but it doesn't feel like it. In fact, sometimes it feels downright painful. The idea of submitting our will to someone else's. He came and he offered something that was so radical because at the moment, calling to be a disciple calls us to something that does not feel good. But I can guarantee you this, that when we follow, we can put our head on our pillow at night with a clear conscience. It wasn't just that here came along a guy who made a radical call to people to be more than simply someone who says, yeah, we're going to casually follow. He calls them to a radical new way of living, and then he stops and he makes some radical claims. He didn't come and he says, I don't want you to follow me because I'm going to be this new guru. I'm a prophet that I can tell you things that you don't understand. You see, when Jesus came, he made some statements that were so radical that it got him into some major problems and eventually got him crucified. You see, the radical claims that he was making and the radical call that he was calling us to was based upon a claim that he made for himself that is unreal. Here's what he says. In John chapter 8, verse 58, he says this, Jesus answered, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was ever born, I am. In John chapter 10, verse 28 through 30, he continues with this, and he says to them, I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one can snatch them from my hands or away from me. For my Father has given them to me, and he is more powerful than anyone else. No one can snatch them from my Father's hands. The Father and I are one. As Jesus came and he offers this new radical way to live, he stops and he says the value of this new radical way is not based upon the fact that I just one night had this amazing epiphany that if we all lived this way, that life would be better. I went out and I fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and when I was fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, I had this amazing epiphany that came upon me, and I realized that if we treated each other with kindness and goodness, that we could all get along. It's not the way it worked. Jesus said, this new radical way that I'm calling you to live, this idea that I'm calling you to be a disciple or a follower, this part of being a part of my kingdom, of what it looks like, based upon the fact that I'm telling you, I am God. There's a radical call because there is someone who calls us who is radical. He's not a guru. He's not an amazing prophet. He's not just this amazing teacher who picked up this stuff. In fact, he says, look, the reason why I can tell you this, the reason why I can tell you this is going to work is because I created you. There is an amazing journey that God calls us into. This amazing journey is based upon who He is. Now, let me go one step farther. Can I just say this? Is through the years, throughout the time that the Jewish people lived, they had many people who raised their hands up and said, I am the Messiah. In fact, Jesus was not the first. He was not the only. It was a common dream that the Jewish people were looking for. And every once in a while, a guy would put his hand up and he'd say, hey, I am a great prophet. I am the Messiah that was promised in the Old Testament. I want to save us and I want to kick Rome out of our country. And they would start an uprising and then things would fall apart. So when Jesus came, Jesus created a big stir because, with his teaching and this radical way of life, and by the way, we're hopefully, as we start on to Tuesday night, here's a little shameless plug for our Tuesday night group, okay? We're going to start looking a little bit deeper into some of these claims and this calling that he calls us to. It's kind of got a little more attention, partly because with all of his teaching, he did some amazing miracles that nobody else could do. But that's, kind of interesting beside the point. There were a lot of messiahs in this day. There was a lot of preachers. There were a lot of gurus. There were a lot of prophets that were showing up on the screen. And Jesus goes, I'm not just going to do that. I'm going to go one step farther. I'm not just calling you to a radical way of life, and it's not a radical way of life of kicking Romans out of our country. It's not a radical way of life of getting upset and, hey, it's a radical way of life that says we're called to put ourselves lower than, to care for, to seek peace, to allow ourselves to be persecuted for doing right, to allow ourselves to be sad, to allow ourselves to understand that we can be poor. And he goes one step farther. And he says, based upon something, I want to give you the confidence that I am worth following. In Mark chapter 10, we read, Jesus says this, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. In John chapter 10, verse 18, we begin to read this. Jesus says, no one can take my life from me. I sacrifice it voluntarily. For I have the authority to lay it down when I want, and I also to take it up again. For this is what the Father has commanded. In other words, Jesus began to say, there's something that I'm going to do to give you the confidence that you can trust that the way I want you to live is for you. There is something that I'm going to do that is going to give you the confidence. I'm going to give my life, and then I'm going to take it back again. Now, the early disciples struggled to understand what he meant. They didn't get it. One night, during Passover, one of his disciples got tired of waiting for Jesus to kick the Romans out of Israel. He realized that the kingdom that Jesus was offering had nothing to do with creating a grand Jewish state. He understood it, probably the first disciple that it dawned on, that, hey, Jesus did not come to kick Rome out. He's got a whole, and I didn't sign up for this, and so he betrays Jesus. And that night as Jesus is arrested, as he is tried, as he is beaten, the disciples do something. They run. They hide. We thought he was worth following, but now we are not so sure. We thought he was the Messiah. He claimed to be the one that was given to us by God. Now we're not sure. They abandoned him that night, and they assumed that the one who claimed to be the Messiah or the Son of God was nothing more than just another teacher. As he was crucified and then put into a tomb, something happened. I just want to pick up a story in Luke chapter 24, verses 2 through 6, and we read this. So they went in, but they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. Why did they not find the body? He wasn't there. They stood there puzzled. By the way, let me just say this. What we read is the reality that the disciples assumed Jesus was dead. He was done. The call that he had called them to had little value to them at this moment because he was dead. He was. There were no Christians at this moment. They are simply followers who are disillusioned and hurt. And then all of a sudden, as they stood there puzzled, two men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. The women were terrified and bowed with their faces to the ground. And then the men asked, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He is risen." Let me just put it in these terms. Here is a man who claimed to be God, gave us a new radical way of living. He was crucified, and then 3 days later, he comes back to life. Let me just say this. If someone claims to be God, calls us to a crazy, radical lifestyle that does not put ourselves at the top of the pile, and then he gets crucified and 3 days later he comes back to life, I think he's worth considering. Look, today we have many people who claim this term Christian. And we know it is such a loose term, don't we? It could mean anything. Yet we know this. When we made a commitment to give our life to Jesus Christ, to accept what he did for us on the cross, to stop and say, God, I want to accept your forgiveness, it was not intended to simply make us a part of an organization. It was not simply intended to give us a part of a block of voting rights to pressure the government. It was not intended to be like a go to university for 4 years and we get to put a little tag behind our name such as BA, Master of Divinity, Doctorate of. It was never intended to give us another title. It was intended to change the way we live. He calls us out from a title to become a disciple. One who understands that there is a need for someone to come and answer that hum that sits in the background of our life, trying to give us purpose, meaning, someone to understand, to help us, give us the values and the ethics and the morality to get through life without making a mess of it. The value of being a disciple, though, is only as good as the one you choose to follow. Remember at the start I said I started following James Hoffman for coffee? He's a good guy to follow for coffee because, number one, he was a 2007 world champion barista. He owns a coffee roastery. He's got credibility. When it comes to your life, to how to live, trying to choose what's right, what's wrong, trying to answer the morality, the ethics, it's important you get it right. There's a lot of claims by a lot of people, and the value of the one you follow will determine the value of what it is you are becoming. Look, can I just say this? To radically change your life, to live a different direction, you better have confidence in the one you're going to follow. For those of us who believe that there was a man who claimed to be God, he gave his life for us, and 3 days later, he rose again, should give us a little bit of a confidence that he knew what he was talking about. Personally, I choose to follow the one who died and rose again. I choose to trust that when he says he can forgive, that he can forgive. I choose to believe that when he says there is a better way to live, there's a better way to live. I choose to believe that when he says I have the words of life, that if you couldn't keep him buried in the ground, he might have the words of life. So, as we start this series called Disciple, here's my challenge to you. More than putting a title on your life, and by the way, I want to encourage everyone, if you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, you can do it today. But I want to challenge us more than simply accepting God to forgive our sin and give us a way to heaven. I want to challenge us to become lifelong followers or disciples of Jesus Christ, to allow him to radically change how we live.